Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be looking at the Cambridge Springs variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined. I've actually already done a video about the Queen's Gambit Decline just like as a whole, so if you want some supplementary material to use if your opponent doesn't play into the traps that I'm going to show you in this video, I'll put a link to that one in the description. But for now, let's take a look at this particular variation. So, of course, our opponent has to play the Queen's Gambit for us to play a Queen's Gambit Decline type structure, which means that they start d4, d5, and then they play the move c4. We're going to decline the gambit by playing e6, and the first few moves in move order doesn't really matter here. We're just going to naturally develop our pieces. Usually, white will bring this bishop out to pin our knight to our queen. This move, knight b d7, and now usually white will continue developing. Now we can play the move c6, and this is where the move order does start to matter a little bit more. This pawn move is important rather than developing one of our bishops, because in certain situations we want our bishop to go on different squares, and we also need our queen to have some space to come out to this a5 square, which is exactly what we're going to do after the move e3. Bringing our queen to a5, this is the actual start of the Cambridge Springs. So even if you have all your good intentions of playing the Cambridge Springs, the opening database isn't going to tell you that that's what you're playing until this move. But this is a very strong and tactical move because it does several things at once. It's pinning white's knight to their king, and it's also aiming at white's bishop through that pawn. All of these are going to be very important in the tactics that we're going to try and find. And first I will show you kind of the best case scenario if your opponent actually plays into your trap. So after white plays the very natural bishop to d3, now we're going to take this pawn on c4, forcing the bishop to move twice. And after that bishop recaptures, now we play the very lovely knight to e4. And this knight can't capture because it's pinned to the king. This also means that we are adding an attacker to this knight, and we're also adding an attacker, this is the one that most people miss, to this bishop on g5. So if your opponent simply tries to defend this knight, which is only defended once and it's currently being attacked twice, with a move like, queen c2, well, now we can capture backwards with our knight, and after this knight takes, we swing our queen over, grab the extra piece, and hopefully we'll go on to win this game. White might see that they're about to lose a piece, and so they might move this bishop either back to f4 or back to h4, and now we can very simply just capture. So we're going to win a pawn. After b takes, we're going to take with the queen. This line is very forcing, so white actually needs to block with this knight because notice that, going back to this position, we are also attacking this bishop, and also if the queen moves down to block this check, well then we're going to win the rook because it's going to be undefended. So this knight move is an absolute must-play move, and now we're going to play bishop to b4. Now we're actually attacking this bishop again, even though it looks like we're technically not because the knight's defending, but once this bishop comes out, the queen is actually attacking the bishop because the bishop's going to still be pinning that knight to the king. So the best move here for white is rook c1, and now you have a few good options. You can just trade. You are up a pawn, and so trading all of these pieces off seems like, pretty decent idea. The position is still very equal here, though, because you have left white with the bishop pair. I don't prefer this line. I would actually prefer just to move the queen over to a3, and now your plans are relatively simple. Getting the king to safety and then trying to free your worst piece on the board, which is your light-scored bishop. Usually tends to be the case in a lot of these kinds of positions, but just breaking in the center with a move like e5. So going back to this position, on a practical level, white is really trying to just equalize here, which is really great for us playing with the black pieces, but the way that white's going to try and do this is by trading off pieces before we get a chance to bring our pieces in and go for our own attack. So often the way they'll do this is by capturing this pawn in the center at this point, and we can recapture with the knight. Again, we still want to exert a lot of pressure on this c3 square and the knight that is currently sitting on it, and if white plays the move rook c1, we can bring our bishop out to b4. Now the most testing line here is to immediately kick the bishop back with a3. We want to capture with our bishop, and after b takes, be careful not to capture with our knight now on c3. That's not what we want to do. White can play the move queen d2, and we're going to be losing that knight, so that's not a great idea. Instead, we can just simply grab this a pawn, and again, we're just happy to be up a pawn. Back to this key position again. If white captures in the center and we capture with the knight, and the rook comes in, we bring our bishop out, same thing we just looked at, but instead, if the queen comes down to defend that knight, well, now this bishop is doing the job of pinning the knight to the king, and so we can actually just grab this pawn, and after the next few moves, we can just simplify, trade off our pieces on this c3 square, and again, we're very happy to be up a pawn, so after something like bishop to d3, just knight takes c3, b takes c3, and we can trade queens, move our bishop back to d6, and we're going to have this really nice passer over on the side of the board that is going to be very annoying for white to deal with. And then one more line I want to show you from this key position is, okay, white sees that their knight is pinned. They want to break that pin, and so they bring the knight back to d2. This is a very solid, very fine move. But of course it does undefend this bishop. This is a good time to capture this pawn. So if white captures with either the knight or the bishop, it doesn't matter either way, we're going to win a piece over on g5. Instead, usually they will opt to capture this knight on f6. If white doesn't want to give up the bishop pair, they can simply move the bishop back to maybe f4. And here we can play b5, hanging on to our pawn, and we'll eventually either solidify or we can just push forward with these kinds of moves, depending on what your opponent plays. I hope this video gave you some good ideas on how to play the Cambridge Springs. It's a really fun opening, and as usual, I would recommend going and trying it for yourself. These videos are just Kickstarters to get you going on the opening, and so the best way to become familiar with the positions and the traps that you will get is by, of course, playing it in your own games. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon.